Hello, Tubby and Coos fans. It's me, Candace, here again for an amazing author event that I'm really excited about. I see some of y'all have already joined the stream and are really excited too. So I can't wait to bring these authors to you. It's going to be really fun. So today, I'm just going to do a brief introduction and let the authors have the rest of the time to have their discussion. So today we are launching Martha Wells's new Murderbot book called Network Effect, which is out today. And Martha has written many fantasy novels, including The Wizard Hunters, Wheel of the Infinite, the Books of the Roxora series, the Nebula-nominated Death of the Necromancer, and a bunch of YA fantasy novels as well. The Murderbot series has won the Hugo, Nebula, Locus, and Alex Awards. And of course, the new book is Network Effect, which hopefully you will all buy if you haven't already. And Martha will be in conversation with John Scalzi, who won the 2006 John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer and a Hugo in 2013 for Best Novel for Red Shirts. His novel Old Man's War was a finalist for the Hugo as well. And he's written a bunch of other books, including The Consuming Fire, which is the first book of the Interdependency series, and The Last Emprox, which is the final book in that series, which was just recently released. So I'm really excited to bring these authors to you. Thank you for being with us. Hello, Martha and John.
Hi.
And so they are going to have a conversation, and I will let them do so.
Hello.
Hi. So we're going to talk about space opera.
How are you doing, Martha?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
We are going to talk about space opera. I'm good. We are experiencing maybe about a 1 second time lag between when I talk and I think when you hear me. So it's basically like one of us is on the moon.
Okay. I'll try to slow my brain down a little bit then.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think we should definitely talk about space opera, and we should definitely talk about what it's like releasing books in the current atmosphere of, hi, welcome to the pandemic, and doing all of the rest of the stuff. But I do, frankly, want to spend most of the time talking about you and your book, because your book has come out today, which is a pretty exciting moment.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I was really nervous coming up to this point, just afraid that something would happen at the last minute and the warehouse wouldn't be able to ship the copies. I still don't have any of my copies. The copies I actually have are for Mysterious Galaxy, which I need to send to them from here after I sign them and everything. So it's just been, it's been extra. I think book releases are always nerve-wracking. But this one has just been extra nerve-wracking.
I had the same thing too, which was the whole idea of, it's always kind of nerve-wracking no matter when your book is coming out, but certainly at the moment when, you're thinking, are bookstores going to be open? Are people actually going to be in the mood to actually purchase books? Are they going to follow what's going on? Are they going to be interested at all? Or are they just going to be like, I'm hunkered down with my toilet paper and beans? So that was a little bit of an anxiety for me. Did you have kind of the same thing going on?
Yeah, it's are people going to be, even if people want the book, are they going to be able to afford it? Kind of, you're just worried about that. And it's just, are bookstores going to be able to get it? Is Amazon going to be able to ship it? And it's just been everything. I'm personally very lucky in how I'm situated for being quarantined, because my husband has been able to work from home. We're in a relatively small town. We're in a house where we have outdoor space we can go to, and we are in a quiet neighborhood that we can walk around. We also have access to a grocery store chain that was preparing for this back in December and January. So we haven't had any problems getting supplies and everything. A grocery store chain that was preparing for it, unlike certain governments we could mention. But so I've just been personally, I've been in really good shape, but it's just worrying about everybody else and worrying about my friends. I have some friends who basically are alone for the quarantine, which is, it just kind of a bit nerve-wracking. We try to keep in touch and online and everything. So it's just interesting times.
Yeah. Now, yeah, no, we're very much in the sort of a similar situation with you, where we have a house, we have property so that we can walk around on it and not worry about necessarily having to interact with folks that we don't want to interact with. And we're in a rural area, and they've sort of internalized the idea of like, well, you're going to be self-sufficient no matter what. But one of the things that I do think in both of our cases, when our books came out, that I think was to our advantage was that they were actually books in a series. Mine was the concluding a concluding book in a trilogy. So people had already bought into the universe and already had done that sort of stuff. And yours was the first novel-length book in a series that had been extraordinarily popular novellas. And can you talk about how much you think the buy-in from being in a series, affects the interest in the book that you have now?
Oh, I think it helps it a huge amount. People already know the characters; they're excited about it. They want they want the rest of the story. I would have been extremely upset if I was a debut author under these conditions, because I think if people are have less discretionary money for treats and things like that, they're more likely to go buy a book that they know that they enjoyed the rest of the series and they want the rest of that story than they are to take a chance on a debut author. And so that's really it's kind of really upsetting to look at some of the authors that are coming out and wonder if this is going to be it for them. They're not going to be able to come back from this, and that's kind of been very disturbing. But again, I feel like I'm in a very lucky place. I think that one thing the novellas and past books bought me was enough momentum to maybe get through this time and not end up with another career crash like I've had earlier in my career.
I think you're right about it's a tough, and I think it's going to be a much tougher time for debut authors, and for not just debut authors, but anybody who's coming up with anything new. But I also sort of wonder if we aren't going to have a thing where we're just be like, it was 2020. I think about this for my daughter. She took the semester off, which turned out to be like the best thing possible for her to have done under the circumstances. But she has another year. But I suspect that there's probably going to just be a lot of kids who are not just going to come back to college. And when people are like, I noticed that you didn't finish your school, can you explain that? And they'll be like 2020, and people will be like, fair enough. So I almost feel like people are going to factor that in. At least I hope that they do.
I would hope so too, because this is a bit, trying to take some kind of elaborate university courses while this was going on would be, you can't do labs. You can do the distance learning.
Come back to... Go
ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that's accurate. I want to talk a little bit about Murderbot. Yeah, no, we're having a bit of a lag again, so I'm trying to make sure that I give you space to respond and not talk over you. So if I do, I apologize for that. But let's talk about a little bit about Murderbot. What do you think it is about Murderbot, beyond it's kind of a cool character, that people have really grabbed onto? Because it really has been like the uptake on Murderbot as a character and as a personality just seems to be really huge. And I'm curious what you think. Is it the right time, the right place, or has it always been a character that would have been popular?
I think one thing is it's very specific about its emotions and what it's feeling. And a lot of people, it's a character with depression and anxiety and other problems a lot of people have. And so a lot of people see themselves in those the difficulty it has in interactions. And I think it's very specific. It's so very specific about its feelings that does help people identify with it. I've heard someone said this, and I wish I could remember who said it. I think it was on Twitter that the general wisdom was that if you make a character very generic, more people will be able to identify with it. And it's actually the opposite, that the more specific you make a character, the more people find these little specific things that they find in the character to identify with. So I think that's probably a large part of it.
I also think that there's something about it that appeals to science fiction and fantasy readers. Almost, I think there's a large population of science fiction and fantasy readers who, I don't want to say feel alienated, but it may feel like they're kind of on a spectrum of how they deal with emotions as opposed to people who are outside of the realm of science fiction and fantasy. I have had people say to me, it's like, I'm on the spectrum and I feel like Murderbot has the same things going on with them that I feel with when I have to deal with humans. So is it something about the audience as well?
I think it probably is. And one thing I've had so many comments from people who were autistic to some degree. It's made me really kind of examine myself. I know I'm not neurotypical, but women my age, when back in the 70s, girls were not tested for ADD or anything like that. They were just assumed to be acting out when they had these symptoms. So it's kind of made me re-examine myself a little bit, because I didn't necessarily put those things in deliberately. That's just how I wrote this character. So yeah, I think it is part of the audience. It's the audience identifying with, again, these kind of specific emotions that it has, and the way it thinks, which is basically to some degree the way I think, since it came out of my head.
But I think you make a really good point there. And I think what is really interesting, and again, to come back to, I believe that both your book and my book have, is we are writing space opera. We're writing about machines. We're writing about space. We're writing about spaceships. We're writing about civilizations that exist in a future. What people really attach to are not necessarily the big space opera ideas, but they are relating specifically to the characters and how they are relating to the world that they are trying to get through. And I think that has something to say about a secret ingredient to space opera that gets overlooked, I think, with the genre in general. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts would be about that.
Yeah, I think relating to technology is a lot of it. The way it's, I used to work with writing software and working with databases in my day job ages and ages ago. And I put a lot of that, the fun of working with software, the fun of working with online things, and also the really annoying parts of it. And I put that all together. And I think that's another thing people relate to, is having to kind of navigate different systems and the difficulty of it. And it's kind of something that everybody can kind of sympathize with. Anybody who has to get online and do anything. Mm-hmm. And if anybody's ever tried to fill out some really complicated form and the system is just designed so terribly that it's just agony trying to do this, I think has some sympathy with Murderbot when it works through all these different, with all these different systems. So yeah, I definitely think that's part of it.
No. The other thing that I think is kind of fun with, in terms of writing a series with a character, is you get the space and the opportunity to put your character in slightly different situations and to have them play the changes, and also to experience growth. I mean, in the case of the Interdependency series, there's one character in particular named Kiva Lagos, who starts off just extraordinarily selfish, and doesn't end up really any less selfish, but she eventually learns how to temper that to the reality of the world that she exists in. And I think it was really interesting for readers to watch some of that arc of character and transformation. I mean, when you are writing Murderbot from the first novella to this novel, I mean, were you enjoying the sort of the luxury of being able to develop the character over several stories and to build that arc of character?
Oh, definitely. That's what I like best about doing series is you can do those long character arcs and really show the changes that the characters go through. I think it was more pointed for me in the fantasy series I just finished, the Books of the Raxura, because there's 5 novels and 2 novella collections. And one of the interesting things is that character also has issues with depression. And it was interesting to see the occasional reader comment as that character did change a little bit throughout the series, of people not understanding why he couldn't just sort of get over his depression now that his life circumstances had improved. And it's like, well, because you don't get over it. I mean, it's something that it tends to be there, and you have to work with it, and you can't just snap out of it because something good happened. So, and it was interesting to show that, to kind of see the readers who understood that and really felt their experience was reflected in that, and the ones that sort of couldn't get it at all and thought, well, it was a mistake. So Murderbot's been kind of the same way. There's been interesting comments. I think something that maybe is a review or something called Murderbot Childlike, which I thought was interesting because it's not childlike at all, basically, but it doesn't. The person thought it was childlike because it didn't understand everything that was to understand about humans. Well, it's not human, and it doesn't really want to understand everything about humans, so that's not really a childlike characteristic. So those kind of comments are always interesting, and kind of.
The thing that gets me, and let's actually talk about this a little bit on the flip side of the advantages to having a series, right? There are advantages to having a series, particularly when the series takes off, and that there's a lot of buy-in for the next book and the next adventure and so on and so forth. But there is also the flip side of 2 things that I think in particular. One, the impatience of people. When's the next thing? When's the next thing? When's the next thing? Or the other thing of, well, you had the characters do this, and I don't think the characters would do this at all. And now this is not the story that I thought it was going to be, and I'm angry with you because you were no longer telling the story that I wanted you to tell. And as a creator, I mean, you've done series before. You know that that's part and parcel of the series game. But how do you balance the expectations of wanting to fulfill expectations so that people have a good experience with the series, but at the same time, having to deal with the fact that ultimately you are in charge of the series and not somebody else, and sometimes that's hard for people to kind of grasp.
Yeah, the most comments I think I've gotten about wanting something to be different was actually the end of All Systems Red, where so many people were upset that Murderbot didn't stay with Dr. Mensah. And that was, and it's like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but this was absolutely the right decision as an author and for the character. Because if Murderbot had stayed with her, it would have basically been like trading up to a better captor. There would have been, the humans would not have seen it as a being that could survive on its own. And because that was their perception of it when at the end of that story, that it could not go out into a human society and survive on its own, which is exactly what it did. So I think that would have been a huge mistake to do that. And if people want to see it the other way, then they should write fanfic, and enjoy the alternate version in the fanfic, because that's what fanfic's for, basically. So yeah, those are actually factors. I don't worry too much about what people's expectations are. I guess I enjoy series. I enjoy like a lot of book series and a lot of TV series and that kind of thing. So I'm used to occasionally being disappointed or upset by something. So I think that's just the way life goes, and that's the way, you know, as a reader or a fan or a viewer of anything goes. So you just kind of have to lump it.
Yeah, no, and I think you make a really good point about the fan fiction thing. I think it's perfectly okay for when people are like, well, I didn't like what you did with this particular character. And I'm like, well, you know, it's okay. I understand if you want things to be different, or alternately, you need to write more about this particular character. And I'm like, well, I'm not probably going to do that, but please feel free to take the character and do what you want with it. I mean, don't try to make money off of it, but short of that, have a ball.
Yeah, and sometimes people have said, well, I wanted to see more about this. And I've kind of thought about it and went, well, you know, that would be kind of cool. We should do more about that, and kind of start thinking about story, like getting that into the story somehow. So when people talk about what they want, it's not always something I can't do. Sometimes it does give me ideas that, you know, well, okay, well, you guys really like this character, and I hadn't really thought about bringing them in more, but I could bring them in more. This could work. So I think it's kind of a balance, really.
Right. No, that makes sense. Let's go back a little bit, and I'm sorry, I am really directing the conversation. And
no, that's
if
okay.
you get annoyed with that, please tell me, Scalzi, stop. You know, but like I said, I mean, your book has come out, and I just love the Murderbot series so much. So I'm kind of being selfish about, no, let's talk about you here. But let's talk a little bit more about space opera, because we promised that we would.
Yeah.
And the first question I have about that is, we really seem to be in a point right now where space opera, after kind of years of just not being a thing, is really sort of having a moment. And I think it really took off with The Expanse, with Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice and the sequels to that, and now moving forward with our books. But what is it about right now, I mean, that makes it conducive to space opera? Are we just being lucky to ride a wave, or is there something going on now that makes it speak to this particular moment?
Well, I think for me, I imprinted on Star Wars at age 13 when it first came out. And it's now I'm sort of in a position to kind of not only kind of use that very powerful influence on me as a kid, but also all the science fiction and space opera that I've read over the years. So I think in some ways it's probably people who were space opera fans when they were younger are now getting into a point where they're writers, and they're starting to write their own work, and these things were influences on them. So I think that's kind of a big part of it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's true. I mean, I think you and I are in kind of the same age cohort. I was 8 when Star Wars came out, the very first one, and I remember being in the movie theater and the opening happened, and that spaceship shot down out of the sky, and you're like, that was so cool. And then all of a sudden you hear this rumble, and then comes the Imperial cruiser, and it just keeps coming. And, you know, and I became a man that day, I think, is what I have to say. But I think that there is something to that. And I do think that there is an ebb and flow to things in science fiction and fantasy, that what's up sometimes, it crests and then it goes down. So I think we are lucky in some ways to be kind of in the right place at the right time with the right material.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think kind of Ancillary Justice kind of kicked off a resurgence of space opera, and people are starting to read that and remember, oh yeah, you can do all these really cool things with space opera as well. You know, it's not just Star Wars, or it's not just, pew pew space battles. You can do a lot of really cool things with societies and the way societies interact, and gender, and these giant space empires and fighting and everything, that it can all be, that it can be more than one thing.
Right. And I think you make a really good point, and I want to talk about this a little bit. By the way, everybody else in the world who's watching this, very quickly, probably within the next couple of questions, we're going to open up to audience questions. So be thinking about what it is that you want to ask and put it into wherever it is that you are putting questions in, so that we can get to those before Martha has to go off and do another event tonight. So 2 events in one night, that's a lot. But I think you bring up a really good point, which is, so space opera has had its ups and downs, its crests and its ebbs before, but this time it's bringing in new elements, and it's bringing in new authors who weren't necessarily part of what was typically thought to be the typical space opera writers before.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this particular generation's diversity and point of view that's different from previous generations of space opera? And there's a cat behind me.
Yeah. I don't know. It's there's so much more, again, so many different voices and so many different opinions and attitudes that are coming in and making space opera a lot more exciting, and it's not the same old. I think I did a talk with the Double Clicks like a few weeks ago. We were talking about kind of how older science fiction, especially maybe back towards the 50s and 60s, they didn't really anticipate. They anticipated these big technological changes and these far future empires and these faster than light ships, but they didn't think about changes in society. And you see these older works where everybody's in a little nuclear family, and the gender roles are so stratified and stilted, and everybody's smoking. There's no anticipation of changes in society, not even little things like that. And I think we're kind of in a generation now where people are imagining changes in society and how society will be different, and what it might look like, and how relationships would be different, and how relationships would be changed by technology, and like the ability to upload your consciousness or relating to machine intelligence and all these other different things. So I think there's just a lot of just a different thought and different looks at all these types of things. And that's one reason why I think space opera has gotten a lot more exciting.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that too. Also, just science fiction and fantasy as a genre in general, for me, it's in a really exciting space now. I mean, there is so much going on that, I tell people that I tend to write very, almost classical science fiction. It feels very much of the same tone and feel that you would have gotten 20 or 30 years ago. Updated, a little bit, but it's kind of what has come before. But that's not necessarily what the mainstream of science fiction is now. The mainstream of science fiction really is so much broader and so much wider, and has so many different writers coming in with different points of view, that as both a reader and a writer, it's just a tremendously exciting time to be in this particular field.
It's growing and expanding. I think in ways we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that, and I think that's only to the for the best. I mean, I know that having read the what's coming out and what the new authors that are coming up, it's exciting, and it also means that it's not precluding the stuff that is thought to be like old line science fiction. That stuff is still there. It's still available. You can enjoy it if you want it. But if you want to be a little more adventurous, or if you want to try something different, the opportunity to read that stuff is there.
Oh yeah, and it feels like there's room for there's room for everybody now. It's not just there's not just one category that's important, or the categories are not nearly as rigid as they used to be.
Right. No, and I think that that's definitely true. One more question for you before I think we should open up to audience questions, and it's I don't want to say it's personal because it's not going to be like, tell us your deepest, darkest secrets, but it does relate to your career, which is you have been writing and producing work, for a while now, and you've been putting out books for a while now, and your career has had its ups and downs, and it's having a really cool peak now. And as a writer, can you talk about the experience of having those ups and downs and having that sort of dynamic range to your career?
It's been really interesting. I mean, because I've been at points where I thought I had a book that was going to really take off, and then something happened, or it just didn't happen the way the publisher thought. And I've been at points where I couldn't sell anything. I couldn't even sell a short story for at least it was 2 years. And that was right after I'd had the most work I'd ever had come out in a single year. I had like a couple of novels and a couple of short stories and some other things. And I've just been at the point where I was literally, before I sold the Cloud Roads, or before my agent sold the Cloud Roads, it had actually been going from publisher to publisher for about 2 years. And I was at the point where I was getting ready to shut down my career. I was turning down, canceling convention appearances, local conventions and things, and basically just getting ready to try to figure out what I wanted to do next. And then it sold and I was back in, basically. So I was really at the point where I was really happy with where I was before Murderbot Diaries, because I was able to sell stuff on a fairly regular basis and things seemed to be going well, and I could, making enough money to go to Worldcon occasionally, kind of thing, and enjoy it. And then this kind of happened, and it just took off in a way that I had never expected to see. I never expected to be nominated for a Hugo, let alone win too. So it's just been a really weird ride. And so I just have no idea what's going to happen next. So, yeah, I have no idea.
But I think it's really heartening, though. I mean, one of the things that I tell people, because it's so easy for writers to think that whatever particular moment they're in is going to just continue on forever, and that's particularly a not a great thing if you are in kind of a trough, right, where the things aren't going and particularly well. And you are at this point one of the people that I point to where I'm like, look, as long as you keep going up to the plate, you still get to swing at the ball, and sometimes it'll whiff, sometimes you'll get a single, and sometimes you hit a home run, but you gotta kind of just keep going up to the plate.
Yeah, really, if you want to stay in, you just have to keep writing the work and submitting the work, and that's basically the only thing you can do. There's really no magic formula except to just keep plugging away and coming up with new stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm, speaking as a reader and a fan, I am super glad that you kept going at it. So
well, thank you.
And I'm so, yeah, you're welcome. But and I'm just so excited that as from the point of a reader and as a point of a peer, that the Murderbot books are just taking off, and that you get to enjoy the basically the fruits of the labor of that. So congratulations on all those successes.
Well, thank you. It's been really overwhelming in good ways and bad ways, but yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. I think we should probably, because we've got about another 10-15 more minutes, I think it's time to open up to audience questions. So Candace, if you've got some questions for us, we're ready for them.
Awesome. And people have been submitting questions the whole time, so we should have more than enough to fill our 10 minutes. So Martha, a couple of people asked this. So just for the beginning, there was a free story that was giving out given out for pre-ordering Network Effect, and a couple people want to know if that can be read before reading the novel or if they should read the novel first.
No, it's a prequel. It goes between Exit Strategy and Network Effects, so they can read that first.
Okay, great. So there you go. A couple people had asked that. So the first question is from Kess M, who asks, what drove the decision to switch formats from novella to novel for Murderbot?
I've always been a novelist. Basically, I haven't done that many novellas, and I don't know. I just felt like writing a larger story, writing something on a bigger scale. And with the idea I had for, I hope it's not spoilery, I don't think it is, to kind of get Murderbot and art back together, I wanted to do that on a big scale and not be confined to just the 30,000 word novella. So that was it. It was just an artistic decision, basically.
Cool. And so Catherine asks, are there any space opera books or series that you find yourself reading multiple times or old favorites, I guess, for either one of you?
I always really, let's see, probably my favorite has been the ancillary, in a long time, has been the ancillary justice books. I also like some older stuff. But yeah, I don't actually do a lot of rereading anymore. There's so much new stuff coming out, and I feel really like I need to keep up with the field. And also, there's just so much new, exciting stuff. I used to do a lot more rereading than I do now. F.M. Busby's space opera was one of my old favorites when I was probably in college. Probably when I was in. It's kind of I hesitate to call it, it's kind of old school space opera, but it also kind of goes in some really strange directions. But I don't know how much of that's available anymore.
Yeah. For me, I reread Dune on a fairly frequent basis, mostly just because I like that particular book. And then I might read a couple of the other books in that series. I don't know if that qualifies as space opera. I don't know how you would quantify that. The other book that I reread quite a lot, and again, I don't know if it qualifies as space opera, but it's really interesting to me, is the Marjorie Westring Writer series from Sherry Tepper, which started off with Grass, continues with Raising the Stones, and then I think Beauty is the third book in that series. But particularly Raising the Stones is one of my favorite books, and I'm absolutely gutted that it is not in print anymore. And I really urge people to read Grass and then follow it up with Raising the Stones. I think they're some of the best science fiction that was out there a couple of decades ago, and it always flummoxes me that they weren't more popular.
Mm.
I like this question as well from Jenny. There's been a lot of talk about erasure of female science fiction writers. Who are some older female science fiction writers y'all would love to see rediscovered by the broader public? Or do you know of any?
I mean, I think I just answered that with Sherry Tepper, right? Yeah. Because Sherry Tepper passed on a couple of years ago, and she just had a whole raft of books, both fantasy and science fiction, that were smart, observant, acerbic, and Grass in particular, I think, is the sort of level of world building that Dune always gets accolades for. So there's a lot to Sherry Tepper's worlds that I think really are worth exploration. And like I said, really just confused she's not more influential.
Well, Judith Tarr is one of the ones that I think really more people should read her books. And I think they're all at least available as ebooks now. I'm looking around. I'm trying to think. Jage Carr. I think she wrote under a couple different names. God, now I've gone blank on everybody's name. I hate it when I do this. She wrote Mirabelle, Janet Kagan. I know she comes up as a favorite. She died fairly early. She only, I think, had 3 books, but they're all great. Phyllis Gottlieb is an older female writer. She did some really cool sort of adventure science fiction, almost cyberpunk like it was cyberpunk before cyberpunk was invented, sort of space science fiction that I really enjoyed, really kind of different, new, exciting stuff. And I haven't heard anything about where she is or if she's still writing, but I love those books, and those are actually books I did reread several times. I'm going to kill myself later when I do.
Okay.
And somebody else who's still writing is Rosemary Kirstein. She's working on the last 2 books in the Steerswoman series, and that's a fantastic series. And it's kind of a slow burn, as the first book is really good, and then you kind of, as the series goes along, it just gets more exciting, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. And we've got this question in a couple of different forms as well. So I'm going to show this one. Murderbot's and It, and a lot of readers identify with Murderbot's gender neutrality. Some seem to really struggle to not assign a gender. So can you comment on the reception of that and on your approach to gender? That's the questions that we've gotten there.
When I started writing it, I wasn't really thinking too much about doing something radical. I just thought, or different. I really couldn't reconcile the idea of giving this terrible corporation would worry enough about the sec units or the constructs as individuals as to give them a gender. So that didn't make sense to me. But as I was writing the character, I thought the character is gonna embrace this aspect of itself, because it doesn't want to be human. It doesn't want to fall in love with a human. There's a lot of stories where robots fall in love with humans, and a lot of them are really great stories. But that's not what I'm doing here. So that's just where it came from. And so I think everything I've done with gender in the series kind of came out of that initial decision. And I don't think I haven't really seen people struggle with it that much, or at least I haven't gotten any comment like that. It is interesting that people sort of automatically assign it a gender. And early on, after All Systems Red came out, one of my friends looked at Goodreads and kind of did a percentage of how many people referred to Murderbot as he, how many referred to she, how many used they, and how many tried to avoid it, assigning a gender altogether. So that was kind of interesting to see, because it hadn't really occurred to me that people would be doing that, would be assuming one or the other, because it says pretty clearly in there that it's not that it doesn't feel it says it doesn't feel itself to be male or female. It's not exactly in those words. It's been so long since I wrote it, I can't remember what it said. But yeah, so I haven't really had anybody be upset about that or anything to me. It's mostly just people startled to realize they had assigned it a gender, whatever gender that was, and that's actually not in the book. So that's it.
That's really interesting, I think, too. And so then this is a question for both of you. What is your favorite character moment in your current series? Something you wrote that made you sort of sit back and grin?
Oh, that's my editor.
Oh, there you go.
It's a plant. It's a plant.
It's question. A plant. John, why don't you go first? Well, that'll give me a chance to think.
For me, with the Interdependency series, honestly, there are so many moments with Kiva Lagos where she's just so much fun to write, and the way that she's basically a Gordian knot sort of person, just cuts right down the middle of things, whether or not that's actually the smart thing to do. So basically, writing scenes with her was always a joy and a danger, because she is so seductively interesting to write, that I had to be careful to make sure that what she was doing did not overweight in the story, and that she wasn't drawing away in a significant way from the other characters. Because there's always that effect of the one character that's the reader favorite or the writer favorite, all of a sudden they just sort of take over the story. And you really have to be careful not to do that, because Kiva, I think people keep saying, oh, I would love a series with Kiva, just Kiva. And I'm like, no, you wouldn't, because she is a character that's best in small doses and leavened out with those other two main characters, because too much of her would be exhausting. It's the smelling the rose syndrome. After the first couple of hits are like, this is amazing, and then too much of it, all of a sudden you are overstimulated and you don't feel it anymore. So that was the character I loved writing, but had to make sure I didn't do too much of it.
I think I have one moment, but I would be really spoilery to talk about it because it's like 2/3 or so into Network Effect. But I guess the second one is probably when there's a couple. I guess the end of All Systems Red, when Murderbot decides to leave, because that really did. I wrestled with what that ending was going to be all throughout writing the novella. So finally getting the character to the point where that was the right decision was just a real fun thing for me as a writer. I really enjoyed. And secondary, it's like when Murderbot and Art meet in Artificial Condition, and the way they kind of click together, despite sort of the initial hostility. That was not something I expected to happen. That just grew out of developing both those characters and having them talk together. So that was really fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at about 45 minutes. I know Martha has another event. So we are going to wrap up. I definitely want to, before we wrap up, put in a plug for sure Network Effect, which I'm going to put up on the screen here. Of course, we would love you to buy it from us, but I know a lot of people are watching from a lot of different places. So please buy from your local independent bookstore. And because we all really need the support right now, and it supports the authors and us. If you want to order from us, this is how you can. We have a bookshop site, and you can also email orders@tubbyandcoos.com. John's book 2 is The Last Emperox. This is the newest one. The Interdependency series is really good. A lot of you have probably read it. Murderbot is really awesome as well. So please buy both books. They are both out now. And thank you so much to Martha and John. This was amazing. I'm so excited that y'all came and did this event with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Martha.
And thanks to both of you. And everyone, thank you for joining and for sending in your questions and for buying books and being awesome readers. And we will see y'all next time. And I'm sure we will all see John and Martha on Twitter, which is where we all live these days.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.